The day I woke up from my 8-month coma, I discovered my parents had already buried me in their hearts. They'd taken my life insurance money, sold my belongings, and moved on. But when they saw me walk into that courtroom very much alive, they collapsed. If you are watching this, kindly subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. And I hope that you're safe wherever you are. My name is Emma Claire Morrison. I once believed my parents loved me more than anything in this world. I was wrong about everything. This story begins on what seemed like the most perfect summer day in Colorado. I was 14 years old, a straight-A student with dreams of becoming a doctor like my father. My mother, Sarah Morrison, was a successful real estate agent who always smelled like expensive perfume and spoke in gentle whispers. My father, Dr. Michael Morrison, was a renowned cardiac surgeon at Denver General Hospital. He saved lives every day, and I thought he'd always save mine too. We lived in a beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street, with white picket fences and rose bushes. My mother tended every evening. Every Sunday, we'd have pancake breakfasts on the wraparound porch, and my father would tell me stories about his patients while my mother braided my long brown hair. I was their miracle baby, born after years of fertility treatments. They'd waited so long for me that every birthday felt like a celebration of their dreams coming true. At least that's what I believed. That July morning started like any other perfect day. My mother was driving me to soccer practice in her silver BMW, humming along to classical music on the radio. We were discussing my upcoming freshman year at the private academy where she'd enrolled me. "You're going to love it there, sweetheart," she said, adjusting the rearview mirror to smile at me. "The best education money can buy." I nodded excitedly, checking my phone for messages from my best friend Katie. The sun was shining through the sunroof, casting dancing shadows across the leather seats. Then everything changed in an instant. A drunk driver ran the red light at the intersection of 5th and Main. The last thing I remember was my mother screaming my name as the world exploded into twisted metal and shattered glass. The impact threw our car across 3 lanes of traffic before we slammed into a concrete barrier. When the paramedics arrived, my mother was conscious but badly injured. I wasn't breathing. They performed CPR for 7 minutes before getting a pulse back, but those 7 minutes without oxygen had damaged my brain. The doctors explained later that I'd suffered severe traumatic brain injury and fallen into what they called a persistent vegetative state. My mother suffered a broken collarbone and some bruises. She was released from the hospital the same day they admitted me to the intensive care unit. For the first few weeks, my parents were constant fixtures by my bedside. My father used his connections to bring in the best neurologists in the country. My mother read to me every day, playing my favorite songs and brushing my hair. Visitors filled my room with flowers and cards from classmates who missed me. But as weeks turned into months, things began to change. The visits became shorter. The flowers stopped coming. My father started taking longer shifts at work, claiming he needed to pay for my care. My mother began missing entire days, saying the hospital environment was too depressing for her mental health. I couldn't speak or move, but I could hear everything. I was trapped inside my own body, screaming silently as I watched my parents slowly give up on me. By month 6, they rarely visited together anymore. When they did come, they spoke in whispers about things they thought I couldn't understand. Medical bills, insurance policies, the burden of my care. "She's not coming back, Michael," my mother said one rainy October evening, standing at the foot of my bed. "The doctors all agree. Maybe it's time to consider our options." My father's voice was tired, defeated. "Sarah, she's our daughter." "No," my mother replied coldly. "Our daughter died in that car. This is just a shell." I wanted to scream, to move, to show them I was still there inside this broken body, but I could only lie still and listen as they planned my abandonment. What I didn't know was that they were already setting something much worse in motion. 8 months and 12 days after the accident, something miraculous happened. I woke up. It wasn't like in the movies where I suddenly sat up and everything was perfect. My awakening was gradual, like swimming up from the deepest part of an ocean. First I could blink, then move my fingers. Finally I could speak in whispered words that made the nurses cry with joy. Rebecca Santos, the neurologist who'd been overseeing my care, called it unprecedented recovery. She'd never seen anyone emerge from such a prolonged coma with minimal lasting damage. Yes, I was weak, Yes, I needed physical therapy to walk again. But my mind was intact, my memories sharp as broken glass. The first thing I asked for was my parents. The silence in the room was deafening. "Emma," Dr. Santos said gently, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "There are some things we need to discuss." She explained that my parents had stopped visiting 3 months ago. They'd moved out of Colorado entirely, leaving no forwarding address with the hospital. When the medical staff tried to contact them about my awakening, all their phone numbers had been disconnected. "Where did they go?" I whispered, my voice still rough from months of silence. Dr. Santos looked uncomfortable. "We don't know, sweetheart. But there's something else." She handed me a manila folder that would shatter what remained of my world. Inside were legal documents that made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, my parents had petitioned the court to have me declared legally dead. They'd argued that my condition was irreversible, that maintaining my care was causing them unbearable financial and emotional hardship. Despite the protests of my medical team, a judge had agreed to sign the death certificate. Legally, Emma Claire Morrison had died 4 months ago. My hands shook as I read further. My parents had collected on my life insurance policy $500,000 they'd taken out on me when I was born. They'd also petitioned to inherit a trust fund my grandfather had left me, worth another $2 million. With their dead daughter's money, they bought a mansion in California and started new lives. According to the private investigator the hospital had hired, they were living as if I'd never existed. "How is this possible?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "I'm alive. I'm right here, Doctor." Santos took my hand. "The legal system failed you, Emma. But we're going to fight this." The hospital's legal team had already begun the process of challenging my death certificate. They'd also contacted law enforcement about potential fraud charges against my parents. But proving criminal intent would be difficult. My parents could claim they genuinely believed I would never recover. As I lay in that hospital bed, reading about my own death and the auction of my belongings, something dark awakened inside me. It wasn't just hurt or betrayal. It was a cold, calculating rage that felt older than my 14 years. My parents had buried me alive in their hearts. They'd stolen my identity, my inheritance, my very existence. They'd moved on to their dream life funded by my supposed death. But I wasn't dead, and I was going to make sure they remembered that. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of medical tests, legal consultations, and physical therapy. The media had caught wind of the story. "Teen rises from the dead to fight parents" was the headline that made national news. Suddenly, everyone wanted to interview the girl who'd come back from legal death. But I wasn't interested in sympathy. I was building a case. Through the investigation, we discovered that my parents had done more than just move away. They'd completely reinvented themselves. My father had opened a private practice in Beverly Hills, marketing himself as the surgeon who'd overcome family tragedy. My mother had started a luxury boutique, funded by what she called her inheritance from a deceased relative. They'd erased me so thoroughly that when reporters contacted them for comment, they initially claimed they'd never had a daughter. That denial was their first mistake. Because I had something they didn't expect. I had survived, and I remembered everything. Can you imagine discovering that your own parents celebrated your death while counting the money it brought them? The law office of Harrison and Associates smelled like leather and justice. I sat across from Margaret Harrison, one of Colorado's most ruthless civil attorneys, as she reviewed the mountain of evidence we'd compiled against my parents. "Emma," she said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses, "what your parents did isn't just morally reprehensible. It's criminal fraud on multiple levels." Margaret had taken my case pro bono, after reading about it in the news. A mother herself, she'd been outraged by my parents' actions. But more importantly, she specialized in insurance fraud and wrongful death cases. "Let me explain exactly what they stole from you," she continued, spreading documents across the mahogany conference table. First, there was the life insurance policy. My parents had increased it from $50,000 to $500,000 just 2 years before the accident, claiming they wanted to ensure my education was funded if anything happened to them. The insurance company had paid out immediately after my legal death declaration. Second, my grandfather's trust fund. Grandpa Morrison had been a successful oil executive who'd left me $2 million to be accessed when I turned 18. parents had successfully argued to the probate court that as my legal heirs, they should inherit this money since I was deceased. Third, my personal possessions. Everything I'd owned, from my laptop to my jewelry to my college savings account, had been liquidated in an estate sale. They'd even sold my childhood teddy bear and the diary where I'd written about wanting to become a doctor like my father. The total theft amounted to nearly $3 million. But here's what they didn't count on. Margaret said with a predatory smile, "You're alive," which means every penny they took was obtained through fraud. The plan was simple but devastating. We would file both civil and criminal charges. The civil suit would demand the return of all stolen funds plus damages for emotional distress and punitive charges. The criminal charges would seek to put them in prison for insurance fraud, identity theft, and abandonment of a minor. But first we needed to serve them papers, and my parents had made that difficult by disappearing so completely. That's when I remembered something from my coma. In one of their last visits, my mother had mentioned a family friend in California, Helen Wright, who'd been my mother's college roommate. She'd said something about Helen helping them start fresh in Los Angeles. Our private investigator, James Mitchell, found Helen within 48 hours. Helen Wright owned a real estate agency in Beverly Hills, and according to public records, she'd helped my parents purchase their new mansion. The house was worth $1.2 million.
Your father is giving a
Cash
keynote
purchase.
speech at the
No
Beverly
mortgage.
Hills Medical
Funded
Conference next
entirely
week,
by my
she
dad's
said,
money.
sliding a
James
printed
also
program
discovered
across
that
the
my
table.
parents had changed
500
their
of his
names.
peers will
Michael
be there.
Morrison was
What
now
if we
Dr.
served him
Michael
papers
Stone,
there,
and
in
Sarah
front of
Morrison
everyone?
was Sarah
I
Stone.
stared at the
They
program.
crafted
There was my
elaborate
father's
backstories
photo,
about being
smiling
childless
confidently
professionals
under
who
the title
moved to
Overcoming
California for
Personal
career
Tragedy.
opportunities.
How loss
They'd
made me a
erased
better
me so
surgeon.
completely
He was
that
literally
their new
profiting
neighbors,
from my
friends, and
supposed
colleagues
death,
had no
using
idea
it as
they'd ever had a
inspiration for
daughter.
other doctors.
That's when Margaret
The rage that had
suggested
been
something
simmering
that made
inside
my
me since
heart
waking
race
up
with
suddenly
anticipation.
crystallized
"Emma,"
into cold
she said,
determination.
leaning
Let's
forward,
do both,
"How would you like
I
to
said
serve them
quietly.
papers
The
personally?"
house and the
The plan
conference.
was audacious.
I want them to
I
face
would
what
fly
they've
to
done in
Los
every
Angeles
aspect
with
of their
James and
stolen
Margaret.
lives.
We'd arrive
Margaret
at their
smiled.
mansion unannounced.
That's my girl.
With a full camera
Over the next
from a
week,
major
we
news
finalized
network
our
that wanted
strategy.
exclusive coverage
James
of
would
the
coordinate with
confrontation.
local California
My legally dead
authorities
daughter
to
walking
ensure
up to
we
the
have law
front door,
enforcement
very
support.
much alive,
Margaret would
demanding
prepare multiple
justice.
sets of
But
legal
Margaret
papers
had
to
an
cover
even
every
better
possible
idea.
charge, and I would prepare myself to face the people who'd given me life, then try to erase it. The media attention was overwhelming. News vans parked outside my rehabilitation facility. Reporters called me the girl who came back from death and the living ghost. Some painted me as a victim seeking justice. Others suggested I was a vindictive teenager seeking revenge. They were both right. But as I packed for California, I wasn't thinking about media narratives or public opinion. I was thinking about my mother's cold voice saying, "Our daughter died in that car." I was thinking about my father's new biography that claimed he was childless. I was thinking about the teddy bear they'd sold for $5 at my estate sale. Most of all, I was thinking about the moment they'd see my face and realize their perfect new life was built on a lie that was about to destroy them. Because sometimes the dead do come back, and when they do, they demand justice. The flight to Los Angeles felt like traveling to another dimension where my parents lived as completely different people. I pressed my face against the airplane window, watching Colorado disappear beneath clouds, carrying with me a briefcase full of legal documents that would shatter their new world. Margaret sat beside me, reviewing our strategy one final time. James had flown ahead to coordinate with the California legal team and set up surveillance on my parents' movements. We needed to know their schedules, their routines, their vulnerabilities. "Remember, Emma," Margaret said softly. "When we confront them, the cameras will be rolling. The entire world will be watching how you handle this moment. Stay calm, stay focused, and let the facts speak for themselves." But inside, I wasn't calm. I was a 14-year-old girl who'd been abandoned by the two people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. I was a daughter who'd listened to her parents plan her abandonment while trapped in a coma. I was a victim of the most intimate betrayal possible. When we landed at LAX, James met us with a folder thick with new intelligence. "Your parents have been busy," he said as we climbed into his rental car. "Your father's practice is thriving. He's charging premium rates and has a 6-month waiting list. Your mother's boutique is featured in Beverly Hills lifestyle magazines. They're living like celebrities." He handed me a glossy magazine article titled "California Dreams: The Stone's Perfect Life." The photos made my stomach turn. My parents, now calling themselves Michael and Sarah Stone, posed in their mansion's marble foyer. My mother wore designer clothes and smiled radiantly. My father looked distinguished in an expensive suit. The article described them as a power couple who moved to California to pursue their dreams after overcoming personal hardships. It mentioned my father's tragic loss that inspired his dedication to saving lives but gave no details about what that loss was. They'd commodified my death into a brand. There's more, James continued. I've been monitoring their social media, their finances, their daily routines. They've completely immersed themselves in Beverly Hills society, charity galas, exclusive clubs, expensive vacations. They're living like they never had a care in the world. He showed me photos from their Instagram accounts. My parents at wine tastings, art gallery openings, luxury car shows. In every image, they looked happy, relaxed, free from the burden of a disabled daughter they'd abandoned. But the most devastating discovery was my mother's blog. Sarah Stone had started a lifestyle blog called Second Chances, where she wrote about reinventing yourself after devastating loss. She posted about meditation, expensive spa treatments, and finding joy after sorrow. She'd built a following of women who admired her strength in overcoming adversity. She'd never mentioned having a daughter, ever. She's monetizing my death, I whispered, scrolling through posts about self-care and moving forward from tragedy. She's literally making money by inspiring people with the story of how she survived losing me. Margaret placed a firm hand on my shoulder, which makes our case even stronger. They didn't just steal your money, Emma. They stole your identity, your memory, your very existence. And they've built careers on that theft. We spent that evening in our hotel, refining our approach. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Serve my father papers at the medical conference in front of 500 colleagues who believed he was childless. Phase 2. Confront my mother at her boutique during peak business hours, with cameras rolling. Phase 3. Serve papers at their mansion, forcing them to face me in the home they'd bought with my death money. Each confrontation would be filmed and live-streamed, allowing the world to witness their reactions in real time. But James had discovered something that changed everything. Emma, he said, pulling out his laptop. I found out why they moved to California so quickly. He showed me email exchanges he'd obtained through legal discovery. My parents hadn't just moved to California randomly. They'd been planning their new life for months before my accident. The emails revealed that my father had been in talks with Beverly Hills medical groups since the previous year. My mother had been researching luxury real estate in Los Angeles and had already connected with Helen Wright about potential properties. They'd been preparing to abandon their life in Colorado long before I ended up in a coma. The accident just gave them the perfect excuse to disappear. They used your coma as cover to execute a plan they'd already set in motion, Margaret said, her voice cold with anger. They were going to leave you anyway, Emma. The accident just made it easier to justify. This revelation hit me harder than discovering they'd taken my insurance money. They hadn't just abandoned me because I was disabled. They'd been planning to abandon me regardless. I was never part of their California dream. I was just an obstacle they needed to remove. That night, as I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the girl I'd been before the accident. A straight-A student who worshipped her father and trusted her mother completely. A girl who believed her family was unbreakable. That girl had died in the accident. But what emerged from the coma was someone harder, smarter, more determined. Tomorrow, my parents would discover that their worst nightmare had come true. Their dead daughter was very much alive, and she was coming for everything they'd stolen. How would you feel if you discovered your parents had been planning to abandon you even before your accident? The Beverly Hills Medical Conference took place at the Grand Regent Hotel, a gleaming testament to luxury and prestige. 500 of California's most prominent physicians had gathered to hear keynote speeches about medical innovation and personal excellence. My father was scheduled to speak at 2 p.m. about transforming tragedy into triumph. I arrived at 1:45 p.m. with Margaret James and a camera crew from National News Network. We'd positioned ourselves in the back of the conference hall, cameras ready to capture every moment of what was about to unfold. Dr. Michael Stone, the man who used to be my father, walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He looked successful, confident, completely at peace with his new life. His expensive suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. He began his speech with a story about loss, about how personal tragedy had taught him to cherish every life he saved in surgery. He spoke eloquently about moving forward from devastating circumstances, about finding purpose in pain. He never once mentioned having a daughter. Sometimes, he said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, we must let go of the past to embrace our true potential. We must accept that some losses, no matter how painful, free us to become who we were meant to be. Those words about my death freeing him ignited a fury in me that felt like swallowing fire. I stood up. 500 doctors turned to look at me as I walked down the center aisle, Margaret and the cameras following behind. My father continued speaking, unaware of the commotion in his audience, until someone near the front pointed directly at me. He turned, saw my face, and the microphone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the absolute silence of the auditorium. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect hall. Dr. Michael Stone, who used to be my father, turned completely white. His knees buckled slightly, and he gripped the podium to keep from falling. "That's impossible," he whispered, but his words were amplified by the sound system. You're dead." "Am I?" I asked, continuing to walk toward the stage, because I seemed to be very much alive. The audience was in chaos now. Doctors were standing, talking frantically to each other, pointing at me and then at my father. Some were recording with their phones. Others were calling for security. Margaret stepped forward, her voice professional and clear. "Dr. Stone, you are being served with legal papers charging you with insurance fraud, abandonment of a minor and theft by deception." She handed the papers to a security guard, who approached my father with obvious reluctance. "This is my daughter," he said suddenly, his voice breaking. "This is Emma, but she was in a coma. She was dying. I was healing," I said, finally reaching the front of the auditorium. "But you didn't wait to find out, did you? You took the money and ran." The cameras captured everything. His shock, his stammering attempts to explain, his growing panic as he realized that his perfect new life was crumbling in front of 500 witnesses. "Emma, sweetheart," he said, stepping down from the stage toward me. "You don't understand. We thought," the doctors said. "The doctors said I might recover." I interrupted. "Dr. Santos has the medical records to prove it. You chose not to wait, because you had other plans." I pulled out my phone and began reading from his own emails, which James had obtained through legal discovery. "Sarah, the Beverly Hills practice confirmed they want me to start in January. We need to finalize the California house purchase soon." That email was sent 2 weeks before my accident, Dad. "You were already planning to leave Colorado. My coma just made it easier to justify abandoning me." The auditorium was completely silent, except for the whispered conversations of shocked doctors and the clicking of camera shutters. "You used my legal death to collect insurance money, inherit my trust fund, and start a new life," I continued. "You've been telling people you're childless. You've built a career on inspirational speeches about overcoming the loss of a daughter you chose to abandon." Dr. Michael Stone looked around the auditorium at his peers, 500 respected physicians, who now knew he'd abandoned his disabled teenage daughter for money. Some were shaking their heads in disgust. Others were already heading for the exits.
"The conference is over," someone announced from the back. "Dr. Stone's presentation has been canceled." As the auditorium emptied, my father stood alone on the stage, still clutching the podium, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. Which in a way, he was. "Emma," he whispered, "what do you want?" "Justice," I replied, "and everything you stole from me." But this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, we would confront my mother. The next morning, we arrived at my mother's boutique, Second Chances, during the busy lunch hour, when Beverly Hills socialites shopped for overpriced accessories. The store was elegant, minimalist, filled with clothes that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. My mother, now Sarah Stone, stood behind the counter, laughing with a customer about some charity gala. She wore a designer dress that probably cost thousands of dollars. Her smile was radiant, carefree, until she saw me walk through the door. The blood drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. The customer she'd been chatting with turned to see what had captured her attention, then gasped when she saw the cameras following me. "Hello, Mom," I said quietly. The crystal wine glass my mother had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. "This isn't possible," she whispered, backing away from the counter. "You're dead. We buried you. I was at your funeral." "No," I said calmly. "You held a memorial service for me and collected the life insurance money. There's a difference." Margaret stepped forward with another set of legal papers. "Sarah Stone, you are being served with charges of insurance fraud, abandonment of a minor, and conspiracy to commit theft." The boutique had gone completely silent. Other customers stood frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. Some recognized me from the news coverage that had exploded after yesterday's confrontation. "You're the girl who came back from the dead," one customer whispered to another. "My coma daughter," my mother said suddenly, as if trying to convince herself this was real. "Emma, baby, where have you been? We looked everywhere for you after you disappeared from the hospital." The lie was so outrageous, so easily disproven, that I almost laughed. "Mom," I said, pulling out my phone, "the hospital has security footage of you and Dad signing papers to have me declared legally dead. You didn't look for me. You buried me." I showed her the video James had obtained, footage of my parents in the hospital administrator's office, smiling as they signed documents declaring me deceased. "You collected $500,000 in life insurance and $2 million from Grandpa's trust fund," I continued. "You bought this store and the mansion with my death money." My mother's perfect composure was cracking. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, probably to call my father. "The Beverly Hills police are already at your house," Margaret informed her. "They're executing a warrant to freeze all your assets." That's when my mother collapsed. Not from grief or shock, but from pure panic. She'd built her entire new identity on my death, and now that foundation was crumbling. The customers fled the store. The cameras captured everything. Within hours, the story was everywhere. National news, social media, international headlines. Parents who abandoned daughter in coma, confronted by her return from legal death. 3 months later, we faced each other in a Colorado courtroom. My parents sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the confident California couple from the magazine photos. My father's practice had collapsed overnight. My mother's boutique had closed within a week of our confrontation. They'd lost everything. Emma Claire Morrison versus Michael and Sarah Morrison, the judge announced. Insurance fraud, abandonment of a minor, and conspiracy charges. When I took the witness stand, I looked directly at my parents. My father couldn't meet my eyes. My mother stared at me like I was a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. They didn't just abandon me, I testified. They erased me completely and built new lives on my death money. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, emails, medical testimony, security footage. Their lawyer tried to argue they genuinely believed I would never recover, but the emails about their California plans destroyed that defense. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all charges. My parents each received 10 years in prison and were ordered to pay back every penny they'd stolen, plus damages. When the verdict was read, my mother finally looked at me directly. "Emma," she whispered, "we're your parents." "No," I replied. "Parents don't abandon their children for money. Have you ever wondered how far people will go when they think no one is watching?" Today, I'm 17 years old and fully recovered from my accident. The $3 million my parents stole has been returned with interest. I've used part of it to establish the Second Chances Foundation, helping families of coma patients navigate the medical and legal challenges I faced alone. My parents write me letters from prison, begging for forgiveness. I don't respond. Some people say I should forgive them, that they're still my family. But family doesn't abandon you in your darkest hour. Family doesn't sell your childhood memories for profit. I've learned that sometimes the people who give you life can be the ones who try to take it away. But I've also learned that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about demanding justice when justice is denied. My parents thought they could bury me and move on. They learned that some things refuse to stay buried. If this story moved you, Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and survival. Comment below and tell me what would you have done in my situation. I read every single comment and your support means everything to me.